Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Nancy Stark, and with me here today, we are so lucky to have Deanna Booker. Deanna is a personal finance expert. She's had many years of experience talking to other people about money, and she is gracious enough to come and visit us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And she also works with Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Maryland and Delaware as their Community Outreach and Communications Manager. And Dee, before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about what CCCS does?
Sure. We are a nonprofit agency. We are providing all sorts of financial education and counseling. So budget counseling, credit counseling, housing counseling, just anything from a personal finance management perspective that folks might need help with. We've been serving folks right here on the shore since 1966, and we love it.
That's wonderful. And I'd like to also say they have offices in Salisbury, Easton, and in Dover.
That's
and
right.
they do a lot of their help by phone, so you wouldn't even need to leave home.
That's exactly right. Thanks
So
for the
that's
plug.
not a problem. As we come into our episode today, it's sunny. At least we hope it's still sunny. The kids are very close to getting out of school, and we thought maybe we'd do a little lighter episode this time.
Yep.
We have a whole host of summer smorgasbord money topics.
Yeah.
Boy, that was a mouthful.
That was.
And to start us off, we've got a letter from a viewer, and Dee, I'm going to let you read what he wrote us.
Okay, he writes, Dear Money Talks, my wife and I have 3 kids, ages 9, 6, and 4. Wow.
Yeah, that's a handful.
This summer, we want to teach them as much as we can about money management, so they'll have an easier time once they're on their own. We've already started giving our oldest son an allowance, but this has led to some problems.
Oh, no.
A lot of times he doesn't complete the chores that are tied to the allowance, and we aren't very happy with how he's spending it once he's got it. What can we do?
Well, they sound like they're in the same situation that many of us have gone through who have children. What advice would you have for them, Dee?
Well, I don't know. The do's and don'ts, like you said, many of us who have kids, we found it out the hard way. The do's and don'ts of allowance can be a very tricky, kind of controversial even topic. Even experts don't agree, always on exactly what should be done. So my advice for parents when it comes to allowance would really be think about exactly what you're trying to teach. Sit down and take some time pondering what lessons is it that you're wanting. Like for this guy who wrote, what is it that you're trying to get your son to get out of it? And then that might lead you into, being able to figure out what's the best way to go with it.
Figuring out what to do.
Yep.
That's good. Well, one of the areas I think that there's a lot of contention about is exactly what age kids are ready for an allowance. What would you say?
And you're right, there is a lot of contention. There have been some studies done, and again, experts writing papers and that kind of thing. Some folks say that kids as young as 3 or 4.
Wow.
Right. That young are ready for an allowance. Others of them say, oh, wait till they're 8 or 9. Again, I really think it depends on the child. It depends on your particular child's level of understanding, level of maturity, what they can handle.
Right.
And I believe it goes back again to what are you trying to teach and what's age appropriate.
Well, that makes sense. One of the things that I've heard from, that in reading about this, and I thought it made a lot of sense, is that at the point that your child actually shows an interest in money and how it works, like starts asking questions, that's maybe a good point to start having an allowance.
Exactly. I agree
sense?
wholeheartedly. It makes perfect sense. When they show an interest, when a kid starts wanting to know what is money and how can I use it and where can I use it and what kind of things, can I get for it and all that, how does it work? So you're absolutely right, or that study is right. When they start showing an interest, that's a perfect time. I think that, and whatever age they are when that happens, I think that's a good age to start with them or start them on an allowance. And even at Consumer Credit, we're so much about financial education, so even with our children, even with small children, it's about what we're teaching. So getting an allowance is helping them maybe learn the value of work, the value of $1, the value of saving, how to save and toward goals that they might have, how to even set those
these are
goals.
A lot of things.
In the beginning, right. So I think it's not just about, if you take out the laundry, I'll, give you $2. I think there really are some lessons, some real true financial behavior lessons, life lessons, I think that kids can get from this when they start learning these concepts early.
Well, the other thing is it seems like it's the first time for many of them that they actually get to have real money and use it in real situations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that goes back to what we were saying about, how can I use it and where can I use it and what kind of impact does it have? I think those kinds of things are important. Those concepts are really important for kids to get relatively young.
Good. Well, once you actually have decided what you want to try and achieve by giving your child an allowance, what's the perfect system to use?
Well, I don't know.
Again,
that's a little
another
harder.
one of those questions.
Yeah,
Huh?
that's a little harder. I think, again, it depends on your kid. It depends on your particular child's level of understanding. But I think what you have to do is have the conversation. I think you have to sit and you have to talk about why we're giving the allowance and, what is expected and kind of negotiate. It sort of becomes a negotiation around some of those terms. And whether or not, and again, this is some of the controversy, is an allowance going to be tied to chores?
Right.
Some people say yes, it should,
truly teach the value of work.
the value of work. It should be tied to the chores. But then there are other folks and other experts who say, well, it's supposed to be a tool. It's supposed to be a money management educational
about
tool.
Personal
Just for
finance.
teaching. So if you tie it to chores, then that kind of muddies the waters. Some people say, there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of things out there. So I think, again, it depends on your child. But you've got to sit down with them. You've got to have the conversation. What do we expect? Talk about how it's going to be earned, how it can be spent. I think you have to have you have to have all of those things defined when you start out, when you decide that you're going to have, you're going to give your child an allowance.
I know when we were looking at our daughters and giving an allowance, one of the things that we did feel like we wanted to tie it to chores. And the reason being that without having something to work toward, we felt like it was just giving away free money.
Right.
And sort of creating a sense of entitlement.
Right.
But I've talked to a lot of people, and what they say is, family chores are family chores. I don't get paid for going to the grocery store, and they should learn that they don't get paid for their either.
I am actually with you. I am of the same camp. I really feel like it should be tied to a chore or a task or something. But you're right about that. They do feel like, well, mom and dad and whoever else, we vacuum and whatever we do, and we don't get paid for it, so neither should you. But again, it's about how you're going to structure it within your own family, because does that sense of entitlement win over, the other lessons that you're trying to teach? So it's difficult to say kind of blanket, but you really do have to have the conversations, and I think everybody has to be involved in them.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like you can spend so much time nagging about getting the chore done that whole lesson about what it's like to spend money in the right way gets totally lost.
Exactly. So if the chores and whether the chores are done well or not take over, you're exactly right. You're going to lose the lesson. So I think you've got to strike a balance. So there's some reinforcement. There's praising, if the chores are done the way you want them. And maybe, I don't know, you stick something to the refrigerator just so everybody can keep track and review and reinforce. Exactly.
That's a really good idea.
So there are ways, I think, to balance it out, making sure, though, that the lessons, those money lessons are really coming through clearly.
Let's talk about what the child does with the money once they earn it.
Yeah.
Is there a right or wrong there?
I don't know. I know I'm probably going to say this 20 more times, but I think it depends on the kid.
You're right.
So right or wrong, I'm not sure, but I think there are different ways of measuring. And again, it's age appropriateness. It's what your child's ready for. It's how old they are. There are a lot of studies done, though, and experts have talked about this, about teaching your child the 3 S's. So when you talk about what's going to be done with the money, because that's big. And even
that's a really big
the gentleman who wrote us a letter, one of the last things he said was, and we're mad about what he's doing with it, So I think that's a big part of it, especially for parents. So experts are talking about the 3 S's. It's spending, saving, and sharing.
Right.
And when we're discussing what kind of money lessons, what are the real core money lessons that we want children to get out of earning an allowance, I think those are the 3. So talking to your child about what portion of their money they can spend, what portion of their money they can/should save, what portion of their money they could share. And when we say share, we talk about,
giving to
a charity or some cause.
To somebody who needs it as much as you.
Exactly. Right. So I think that's important, but again, it's got to be age appropriate. So when you talk about, well, how are you going to do that? How do you set it down for each child? There I think some differences come into play.
What are the tools that you could use maybe in doing that?
I think that for younger children, maybe we're talking about children that are 4 or 5. Maybe it's just as simple as, you've got 3 drawers up on their dresser, and Each of them has an S on it. One's for spending, one's for saving, one's for sharing. And
so you're 3 jars, and they're putting their money in.
Exactly. They're putting their money in it. In ways that you've talked with them about. Maybe children that are older, maybe they're elementary or junior high, say, age. Maybe that's an age where they might be ready to open like a student savings account at your local bank. And of course, they're going to need your help with that and that kind of thing. Now, maybe older kids, high schoolers, maybe they're ready for their own checking accounts.
That they're not that far from leaving home.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, it's about the lessons and preparing them. But if they do open their own checking accounts, you want to make sure that you've worked with them and you've talked with them about the best kind of checking account for them and what the fees are and how to balance the checkbook. Some more lessons, that you're
those
adding
things that they're going to need to know when they get out there.
Exactly.
We're going to come back to that in a moment. I have one last question about allowances, though, and that is, here's a really good question. How much do you pay your kids?
And that's the question that people ask all the time, and it's hard to know. I think it lends itself to a couple different discussions. A lot of the times people say, well, you pay your kids $1, per every year they are old. So if you have a 4-year-old, you pay them $4. But then the argument becomes, well, what if I have older kids?
And they get more money. They're older.
They get more money. And the thing that I always caution parents is you don't want to set yourself back. So you think about, say I've got a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, that's a lot of money every week that's coming out of your budget. So you've got to keep an eye on your own personal finance and your own management. You have to make sure that the amount of allowances that you're giving fits into your budget, and you're not just losing money giving it to kids.
You're losing money while they're getting money.
Right. So it really does depend, I think, on things like that.
It's always important for it to fit in your budget.
Absolutely.
And it would seem like with older kids, I know with our kids, what we did, the older they got, they had more responsibilities as far as what they had to pay for, like as far as clothes and things like that, necessities.
That's a great point. That's a great point. So the more money you give them, older kids,
you can expect more.
Right, you expect more. They take on more responsibility. The less of their stuff you've got to pay for. So that's a great point.
So we've talked some about allowance. And while we were talking about allowances, we talked about teaching kids about finances, obviously. And this is a good time of year to talk about that, because this is the time of year when thousands of Maryland students graduate from high school and are getting ready to go to their first-time job or off to school in the fall. It seems like this is a great time of year, our last summer there, to teach kids more about finance. But exactly how much do we know? Are kids leaving home financially prepared?
It's interesting that you asked that, Nancy. I just read a survey that ING directed, and believe it or not, kids aren't as prepared maybe as we'd like to think they were.
News.
There was a huge portion of the teens that were polled that said they really were unsure, about their finances. It was about 87% said that, and these were the words that they used, said that they didn't know much about personal finance.
Oh, that's not too good.
There was another, and I brought these with me because I wanted to say them right. There was another 35% that said they'd like to learn to save, but aren't. And there were about 28% of the teenagers that said that they know that managing a budget is important and that they want to learn the skill, which implies that they don't have the skill.
They don't have the skill. But it's encouraging that they do want to learn.
Exactly. And that's where I was going. That's why I wanted to make that point, because all of these studies are showing that kids are gaining their money management knowledge and the habits and the behaviors that they're carrying with them. They're getting them from home. So
that's where they're more than from school.
Exactly. Exactly. So for young adults that are planning to leave home this fall, now's really the time for parents to start, if they haven't been, to start having these conversations and really start getting them ready to be out there.
Why do they need to know about budgeting?
Because it is at the core of all of our personal kind of financial houses. Budgeting really is. It's really crucial that they have the skill, that they understand what it takes to manage their income and manage their expenses month over month, especially when they leave home. So it's definitely something that parents need to be talking about right now. Sitting down with the children, going through, understanding what their income is, if they've got income, is it coming from work, wherever it is, figuring out exactly where they are financially now, because believe it or not, they are somewhere, with whatever they have.
Yeah, they're going to have definite expenses when they leave home.
Exactly. So you've got to figure out and help them to figure out where they are now, so they're going to be in a better position to be able to manage when they do get to school or they're out on their own and they're working, all of the expenses, all of the things that they have to cover. So you really want to be talking with them about what's income now, what's projected income even.
Right.
What are your expenses? Everything everything, rent, utilities, food, whatever it is that they're going to have to pay for, fitting that all into a budget, doing the math, figuring out where they stand. Do they need to make adjustments? Do they need to cut back? Are they coming up short?
What does it mean to balance it?
Exactly. Are they going to have to make some adjustments to balance things out? So maybe now's the time that they need to start thinking about, over the summer and over last year, kind of maybe they've had money to burn. But now, maybe we got to cut the cell phone back. Maybe we've got to cut out some of the entertainment and the going out and the shopping and that kind of thing. Now's really the time to start having those kinds of conversations with your young adults.
I think that's particularly true if they're going out to live on their own, because a lot of times when I can remember going out to live on my own, I thought, woohoo!
Right.
I suddenly can do this my own way.
Exactly.
But with that said, what are some of the concepts that they need to learn when it comes to budgeting?
Well, I think they need to learn about goal setting. I think that's really important. It's really important that they learn that working from a budget and setting up a budget and maintaining a budget is going to help them as they try to achieve their short and long-term goals. So it's about having the foundation, to be able to get to where it is that they want to go when it comes to goal setting. So I think that's one of the really important ones.
That's a good one. For kids that, if you haven't ever lived on your own, it's really hard to even know what it takes to live.
Sure.
Are there anything I can do as a parent to help them learn that?
Well, I think you just want to teach them the concept of stretching a dollar. You want them to understand what it means to be able to make the money that they have fit all of the expenses that they're responsible for. So they've got to learn that concept, what it means to stretch a dollar, what it means to, use coupons when you're out shopping.
Right.
Let them go to the grocery store with you. Absolutely, it's a big deal.
Or comparison shop too.
Exactly, that's exactly it. Teaching them about comparison shopping. Because again, as old kids or young adults, whatever you want to call them, they've been doing so many other things. They haven't been interested in going to the grocery store with you.
And now that they're going to be doing it on their own, they might be much more motivated.
Now's the time to get them motivated about it. So you take them and you teach them, like you said, about comparison shopping, about using coupons. You let them know what it means to keep their checkbooks balanced and their bank accounts, current and things up to date. You really just have to start delving into these kinds of lessons with them right now before they get out the door.
One of the other things that I found when I was doing research for this that I thought was an interesting idea is having them sit down with you and sit in on a bill paying session so they can see how things, what they really cost.
Absolutely. They can see really what it takes to pay for everything. So the next time you're at the table and you've got the bills spread out and you're writing checks and you're mailing things off, bring them in. Let them understand how much utilities really cost. Give them an understanding of, what it takes to feed a family of however many. Really let them see what goes into the monthly meeting of expenses, and it's going to give them a different perspective, I guarantee you.
We've talked a little bit about cutting back on spending. What about saving?
Saving is so important, as much as a young adult is going to be able to, on the income that they have. And it might seem kind of difficult, for a young person who's just starting out. So they're a student or they're on their first job income, and they've got other things to pay. It might seem difficult to save, and it can be, but it's not impossible. So you want to make sure, again, that you've taught your young adult the concepts. So you've talked with him or her about, if they're working, using direct deposit. And
pay yourself first.
Exactly. We say that all the time when I'm here. Paying yourself first, diverting a little bit of that paycheck, as long as it fits in the budget, right? Automatically, so you don't miss it, so it's not painful. And you're establishing that savings. What I want to make sure young adults are taking away is that even a little bit, a
can make a big difference over time.
Exactly. A small amount of steady saving. It's going to help you over time. It's going to benefit you over time. So it's not impossible to save. And as parents, we want to be making sure that we're giving kids even a even more broad, concept around saving. So talk to them about, your 401k. Tell them about that concept. Show them how it works, right? Because if they're getting to their first jobs, if they're leaving school and they're getting to their first jobs, you want to make sure that they're taking advantage, of these kinds of things that employers might offer. Tell them about Social Security and what the deal.
It probably isn't going to be there when you go.
What the deal with that is. That it probably isn't going to be around when they're old enough. So they want to start building their savings. And it's a hard concept sometime for, a kid who's 20 or 21, right? They're not thinking about 65 or 77 or whatever the retirement age is going to be. But you want to get them into that practice now, so they're building that foundation for the rest of their lives.
The sooner that you start, the better chance you have when
Absolutely.
you get to that age that you're going to be really prepared.
You're absolutely right.
With that said, what do students need to know about using credit wisely?
I think you really have to get them on this. You really have to get your young adult, and you have to have some conversations around what it means to use credit. A lot of times kids think that credit's free money, that you can whip out the credit card and it's just free. But it isn't. Young
a lot of adults think that too.
Young people need to understand especially that every time you use that credit card, you are making a loan.
Yeah, you're taking out some.
You're taking out a loan, and every loan has to be repaid. So I think you want to start there. That's the core of it. And you want to have talks with them around, the terms. What does it mean what's APR?
Right.
And what's that mean? What does it mean?
How does it affect you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does interest accrue? And why does it accrue? And when is it going to start accruing? You want to make sure that you're teaching your young adult all of these kinds of concepts around credit cards. Why it's not a good idea to only pay the minimum payment.
Right.
What's going to happen if you can't pay the balance off in full? All of these things, all of this information kids need to know before they start using credit.
That makes full sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice to parents whose kids are taking out student loans?
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a big
Believe it or not,
debt.
student loan debt has just surpassed credit card debt
That's
as the
amazing.
largest, chunk of debt that folks have in this country. It's something like $1 trillion. It's huge. So student loans are a big deal. The main advice that I would give to parents is be active in the process. Understand and walk kind of hand in hand, euphemistically,
in other words, don't just
don't
give
just
it to your kid and
say
go
here,
off.
fill it out.
You're on your own.
You really wanna go through the process with them so you can understand just as well as they can understand what it is they're getting into. Again, about the terms of the repayment, when are the loans going to be due, what's the interest rate, what kind of options do I have. It's really, really important that parents are going with their children, through that process. Now I said that, and now I'm going to say this.
Yeah.
You may want to stop and think, and you may end up stopping short of co-signing
that's interesting.
those loans for your children. Even though you're going to go through the process with them and make sure things get done the way they're supposed to, you might want to think twice about
co-signing.
co-signing.
You want to co-sign?
And it's because if your child comes out of school and they aren't able to find employment right away, and student loans are due 6 months after graduation.
Right.
Those payments are. If your kid doesn't have a job and they can't pay, if
You are
co-sign,
going to pay.
exactly, if you co-sign for that loan, you are 100% liable for the payments. And again,
For
it's
the
about
entire payment,
exactly.
yeah.
It's about your own personal financial situation. Parents have got to stay mindful of their budgets and their finances, even as they try to assist the children. So, co-signing, you really want to think about it.
That makes sense to me. I guess you also want to talk to your kids about the types of decisions they're going to have to make, like even choosing the major, where it's going to go.
Exactly.
Nothing is assured anymore as far as with jobs and the economy.
Exactly right.
What school you actually attend,
right?
Where you're going to live.
And I think you have to make, and this kind of is on the front end of the process, but you've got to make maybe what might turn out to be some hard choices. You might have to talk to your kid. Maybe there's the potential, for your child to go to community college for a couple years, depending on the field of study that he or she is in.
If they're not really sure on what they want to do.
Right. You want to figure out how you can make things cost less, and the decisions that they make, like you said, the major, where they go, if they live on campus or off of campus, all of these kinds of things are really going to have impact going forward.
For both of you.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about vacations. All of us, now that we're into the summer, it's nice weather, we're thinking about getting away, although many of us have not figured out how we're going to afford to get away. Do you have any advice there?
Well, I think you just got to think, and you got to get specific around, what it is that you're planning. Figuring out what you really can afford. So we talk about this all the time when I'm here, and this is just bringing it in from a different perspective. Back to the budget. You've got to sit down, see where you are, what income we have, what expenses are coming due. Because, and I just thought of this, but add this in with, okay, the kids are about to go off to college. Can we really afford? So you got to think about everything that's going on. But if you have a place in mind, or you've determined where you want to go, and you've looked and you've sat down and you're comfortable about what you can really afford to spend, then I think it's about just, getting to the planning and figuring out how you're going to be able to, on one hand, have a great time and have a great vacation, but keep costs low. So you want to look at things like tickets, airfare if you're flying somewhere. Are you flexible in your travel? If you're flexible a little bit with your dates, you can save. You can save on tickets.
It can make a big difference if
Absolutely.
you do shoulder season as opposed to doing peak season.
Absolutely. And shoulder season, I love that phrase. Shoulder season is a week right before and a week right after peak season. That's perfect. I'm so glad you said that. So yeah, if you're able to travel at different times, you can save some money. Hotels. You don't always have to stay at the big name, chain hotels. When you do, number one, you're just paying for the name.
Exactly. And a lot of times you are. That's true.
And you don't always necessarily get more for your money. So with lodging, there's really a lot of ways to save when it comes to lodging. You want to look at, house sitting opportunities. You want to look at vacation rentals, folks who are actually renting out their homes for the seasons. Family-run hotels, bed and breakfast, that kind of thing. So there's some ways to save around that kind of stuff. You really got to kind of start thinking outside the box and really looking at how you can cut costs and still have a good vacation.
What if you're looking at all those things, but you've got 2 kids in college and you're still having to pay on your car and you've got a bunch of other things going on? Are there any options for still having a good time and having a vacation but not breaking your budget?
Yeah, it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite term. I just learned it last summer, and I'm wanting to say it all the time. A staycation.
What
Have
exactly
you heard
is
that? I love it. I saw it on the internet, and I thought it was the most clever thing I'd ever heard. But it is. They call it a staycation, and what you're doing is staying home, but you're on vacation.